Hi, everybody, and
Hi.
welcome to Helping Our
Hello.
Wild Neighbors, or as I sometimes call it, Surviving the Urban Jungle. And what we're really going to talk about here, I do a lot of wildlife rescue. I started out in wildlife photography and it phased into doing rescue as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about human-wildlife conflict. And that's kind of what this course is all about. And this is actually, I live right near two major streets in Sacramento County. One of them is Hazel Avenue. It's almost like a freeway. It's 6 to 8 lanes wide. It crosses the river, so it gets people all the way from one side, all the way into another county. And busy street. So driving down it early one morning before it got busy. So this is right as the sun is coming out, probably 5:30 or 6 in the morning. This young buck went running across Hazel. And he actually didn't just go across, he proceeded to trot down Hazel. And I was out with a friend, and we kind of herded him off the street because we just had this horrible image of what might happen to him. And traffic's going to be picking up in another hour and a half. And so we kind of herded him into one of the side streets, and you can access both the river and the lake from this area. So we kind of hoped he would be okay. We got a call a couple of hours later that there was a dead buck in the middle of Hazel. So we went back out to take a look, and it was our little buck we'd seen that morning. And that was kind of my first I knew there was a lot going on with humans and wildlife. I'd been seeing it for much of my life, but that was just kind of my big, oh my gosh, this has gotten really bad. I live in this suburban area with a lot of people, yet we have the river going through there. There's a lot of animals that run around, and they're getting hurt. They're getting killed. Conflict can be unavoidable because as humans move further and further into the wild areas, which we are doing, it doesn't matter what state you live in, what area you live in, we are encroaching into what used to be wild territory because there's more and more people and everybody needs a place to live. So conflict is going to happen. And it doesn't matter the species, there's always going to be fights over territory. And these are all just various wildlife conflict photos I've shot. But we need to learn to be better neighbors. We need to learn to get along with our wild neighbors as well as our human neighbors. When I say wild neighbors, I'm talking about wildlife, not your human neighbors that play the stereo too loud. So the focus here really is on our, what I call wild neighbors, our wildlife friends. And when you look at animals, they can actually do a really good job getting along, even in multi-species. So again, these are photos I've taken of wild animals in my community. And this is my community. And many different areas look like this. This used to all be wild. There was a small city down here called Sacramento, and then it was pretty much all wetlands, open fields. We had a lot of grazing land. We had a lot of oak riparian forest. We have a river that cuts, we actually have two rivers cutting through Sacramento, the Sacramento River, and then one of its tributaries is the American River. So this was all wildlife. And now it isn't. Now we have tiny little green belts and a lot of people. We have amazing biodiversity living in our communities, attempting to survive with people. And again, these photos are just photos I've taken in my own community. So we have bald eagles. These guys are like 7 minutes from my house. We have a couple of beautiful preserves in the area where we have amazing migrating animals. This was taken at the American River. This is actually an award-winning photo I took 2 years ago of a couple of great egrets that are actually having a territory fight. It's kind of fitting for this. But we have all this beautiful biodiversity within our communities. Again, most of these are taken right in Sacramento County or surrounding counties. These are areas I go walking in every day. And just kind of illustrating what beautiful animals we have that we need to learn to live with. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is how we learn to live with these animals and how they are currently getting in trouble. So a little bit on surviving the urban jungle from the eyes of a wildlife rescuer. So I'm going to tell some real life rescue stories that illustrate things that we as humans are doing that maybe we could do better so we're not causing injury or death to our wild neighbors. We create the unnatural. And this bear is actually, he has denned underneath a building. So a building's not a natural place for a bear to den. So what he's doing now is trying to squeeze out through this little hole in the building. And these are some other examples of obstacles we've created. Here we've got, this is actually inside a school, and a bird got into this, and I'll talk a little bit more about these rescues. But these are just some examples. Roads are so unnatural. And we see so many animals killed and hurt on roads. And this little picture off to the side, this is a busy road. We got a call during rush hour that a family of geese was attempting to get their babies into a safe area. And you can see there's a fence here. The geese, the parent geese can easily get over this fence, but they have goslings. The goslings can't get over, they can't get under, and they can't get through. So both sides of this road are fenced for over half a mile. There's golf courses and developments on both sides. So the geese are trying to herd their babies somewhere safe. And what we did is showed up, herded them off the road, found a locked gate, and basically broke into the gate so that the geese had a place to take their babies. So I'm going to go through some of the more common unnatural things we've created in our communities that do cause a lot of damage to wildlife. And I'm going to start with one of the biggest causes of rescue calls that we get. I work with several different licensed rescue groups. So in California, our rescue groups are licensed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we have all kinds of rules we have to follow. And the real focus of the rescue groups is rehabilitation. So we mostly count on the general public to bring us in animals that need help. But there's a small team of us that do what we call field rescue. So we'll go out and get animals that are in trouble. And in trouble by fish and wildlife standards means they are ill, injured, or orphaned. And they're animals that maybe a regular person can't capture, or they shouldn't be handling because they're dangerous. So it's either difficult to capture or dangerous to handle, or in a situation where the people can't get to them, like sometimes we go into chimneys or up under roofs, or other high areas or difficult to access areas. And we then will bring the animals into the licensed rehabilitation facilities for help. And filament, which is fishing line, is one of the leading causes of injury in our parks and waterways. We have a lot of people who do recreational fishing in Sacramento and its surrounding counties because we have a lot of rivers that go through. And I know you have the Chesapeake Bay with a lot of fishing that goes on. So fishing is great. It's a great way to get in the outdoors, to spend time with your family, with your kids. I grew up going fishing with my parents, but filament, fishing lures, fishing hooks are extremely dangerous to animals. And so what we want to make sure is that we do clean up after ourselves. And it's not just fishing stuff, it's string and twine. I used to have a horse ranch, and baling twine, which is one form of twine. We'd snip the hay bales open. And I was always very careful to wrap that baling twine up and throw it away, because it can hurt horses as well. But we get calls for animals wrapped up in baling twine, wild animals running around. They often end up losing a leg because of that. So this is a picture I actually took on the American River. And I do carry stuff around with me when I'm out on the river. So I always have, my car's always loaded and ready to go for rescues. And I do have a grabber that can extend. I can reach another 4 feet with that. And I will go and try to pull stuff out of trees, but this was way too high for me to get. So someone had just, when they back flung to cast, they wrapped around this branch and they just cut it and left it. And I was walking along the river and I just saw this is a phoebe, black phoebe, sitting right above that fishing line. And I just kind of cringed and went, there's no way I can get to this. But this is an accident waiting to happen. And we see this all over in our waterways. And so here's another one that I couldn't reach. I decided to take a picture. This was over one of our local ponds that people love to go fishing in. And here's a real life rescue. This call came through one of the licensed organizations that I work with. Someone called it in and said, there is a heron or egret out at one of our local parks, and he appears to be stuck in some kind of string or something, and he's having problems flying. So a couple of us went out and checked it out, and we were unable to get anywhere close to him. He could fly a little bit, and the pond was about 4 feet deep, and he had figured out he could just fly a little bit, skim over it, and get away from people. So it was not going to be an easy capture. And he had a little island in the middle of the pond that he would go hang out in. And so you can see here, he's got a fishing lure. This is the fishing lure, and it's got a treble hook. So a three hook on each side of the lure. One treble hook had hooked into his mouth, into the corner of his mouth. The other treble hook, you can see here, is hooked into his neck. So he could not drink, he could not eat, he could not extend his neck at all. So we ended up having to go back several times, and one of the guys I work with has something called a net gun. So it's actually a net on a gun that you can launch up to 30 feet. And one day he and I went out there, and I kind of distracted the heron so it was focused on me. He crept around behind a tree and was able to net it. Then I jumped in the pond and grabbed the heron. And we were able to take it in and remove the double treble hook, glue his neck together. We were able to release him the next day. We gave him a they gave him a long acting antibiotic and some fluids, and we're able to release him. So there was a happy story, with a happy ending to this story. And there are sometimes happy endings. This is another one where I got a call for a mother duck that was struggling to eat. And this was in a local pond. And the woman that called it in actually had a small class of special ed students that she took out to this pond once a week. And so she said, last week we noticed that the mother duck was having problems, and it looks like there might be a string or something on her. So the following week they noticed that she was still having problems and seemed to not be doing well. So they called it in, and I showed up and was able to, it took a little bit of time, but I was able to get a hand net over her and catch her. And so this is a picture of me holding this duck, and you can see that we have fishing twine that is actually tangled around her lower bill. It tangled over her tongue, and it knotted. And fishing twine does this. It will tangle and it will knot on its own. And so her tongue actually had been indented. The bill had been indented. It had probably been like this for several weeks. I was able to cut it loose, and because she had babies, She appeared to be okay after I cut all of this off. There was no blood. There was the tongue was still viable. So I turned her loose, and the woman who goes out there every week with her class, they were all there. They got to cheer it on. She called me several times after that and said, Mama Duck's still out there. She's doing well. The babies are doing well. So this was another happy ending. This, on the other hand, not such a happy ending. So this is a cormorant who has what I'm pretty sure is a hook down its throat. And this unfortunately happens a lot with our cormorants. I just saw one yesterday. It flew overhead and I caught the fishing line trailing from it and just cringed, because if they're flighted, it's very difficult, usually impossible, to catch them. And we can't even go after a smaller bird like this with a net gun, because the net gun would just destroy them. It would obliterate them. So the only way we catch a bird in this situation is if it's gotten so weak it can no longer fly. And usually at that point, they go off somewhere and die. And this was another example of a local bird. We actually have several feral colonies of these mute swans in various areas around Sacramento. And this one had gotten a fishing hook down its throat. And we tried several times to capture this swan. Ultimately, it unfortunately passed away. So just another example of fishing line and fishing equipment gone bad. And this was another really sad story. I got a call from a local photographer who said that we have a sandhill crane out here and it appears that its leg fell off. And I kind of went, what? What do you mean its leg fell off? And he said, well, the leg is dangling. I don't know if it's broken or what's going on. So I jumped in my car and went out there because I love sandhill cranes. They migrate through every year for a few months, and they're really fun to photograph. They're just amazing birds. And I was able to find this little family of sandhill cranes, and sure enough, his leg had fallen off. And I took a few photos, and what I found when I blew it up is this is fishing filament that had basically killed the leg. So it got wrapped around his leg. His foot ultimately had died, but the filament was still wrapped around both the foot and the stump. So he was dragging his stump around with him, along with some weeds that had come out of the water. We couldn't get anywhere near this guy, and there's not much we could have done other than to cut it loose. But I went out and checked on him every week, and ultimately the fishing line did break off, and so he has a stump on one side and a leg on the other. And I called, there's an organization that studies sandhill cranes. It's a foundation. So I called them and just said, what are the odds of one of these guys surviving with one leg? And they said, the odds are actually pretty good. We do see them, and it's usually fishing line injuries. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm dealing with right now, is a fishing line injury. I can't capture him, but he appears to be doing okay. So just another example of the kind of injuries that we do see. And I see fishing line all over the area waterways, tangled up in trees, laying on the ground. I'll come off, I walk out on the American River probably 5 days a week. I do other outings in other places, but it's one of my favorite places to walk, and I live right near it, so it's a couple of miles away. There are mornings where I will come off the river, and every pocket I have is stuffed full of fishing line. I've got trailing from me because I can't fit it all in my pockets anymore. But I hate leaving it out there, because I know if I leave it out there, next thing you know, I'm going to get a call that something's hung up in fishing line, or there's fishing hook in something, or we've got another bird that lost a leg. So I do tend to pick it up if I can.
Michelle?
Yes.
Let's try and use this as nesting material.
What was that?
Will some birds try and use this as nesting material?
They will. In fact, I think I do have a picture later on of a nest that was built out of fishing line. And the danger you have there, because they can actually make it, it's a very beautiful nest sometimes, But the loose line, the problem with fishing line is, if you're a fisherman, you know this, it's incredibly powerful. It doesn't break. And so if a baby is in the nest and it gets a leg or a head stuck under a piece of twine, odds are the leg or the neck is going to give way before the twine does. And so it's going to kill it. And yeah, I do see it in nests. I see fishing line in nests. I see baling twine in nests. Last year, I was visiting an osprey nest, and it was just baling twine all throughout it, making it very colorful, but again, pretty dangerous for babies. So yeah, it's another reason we should be picking it up. So we saw the injured great blue heron. I'm gonna, as I go through each of these areas of danger, I want to include at least 1 or 2 pictures of a healthy example. And so this is a pair of great blue herons that are not injured. They're not hung up in fishing line. This is how we want to see them. Whole and complete and healthy. And in this case, they're building a nest. He's flying in with, you can see in his mouth, this is not fishing line. This is a stick. And they are in the process of building a nest. So how do we fix it? In the case of fishing line, filament, hooks, and in the case of almost everything, education is a key. Unfortunately, what I would like to see is going to require legislation. I would like to see all fishing gear that's sold in stores contains labels warning people of the dangers of loose fishing gear with graphic photos. And one reason I talk about this here is the more people we have contacting our legislators and saying, hey, did you know fishing line is actually really dangerous? The more likely it is that we will see legislation pass. I would like to see informative signs. And you see this picture I have here. This is actually a sign that we put up, and it's actually not a fishing line sign, but it's a sign about watching for injured and orphaned babies. We've gotten permission from some of our area parks to put up signs. And again, I would like to see graphic photos letting people know this is what happens if you just leave this stuff laying around, because a lot of people just don't understand. They don't know that it's dangerous. Licensing requirements and fines, again, this would require legislation. I think there should be required annual training to get a fishing license. In California, you used to be required to display your fishing license. You had to actually wear it around your neck when you were fishing. So someone could quickly come out and say, oh yeah, I can just look at you and know you're licensed. Now people are allowed to keep their fishing license in their pocket or their wallet or their car. And as a result, we see a lot more people actually fishing illegally. So if we're going to have training, we need to make sure they're properly licensed. And some of the funding from those licenses could help pay for some of these costs. And I would like to see significant fines for improperly discarded filament, hooks, lures, etc. I'd like to see legislation that says if you leave stuff out, it's dangerous. First time we catch you, it's $100 fine. Second time, it's $250, something like that. So people start to realize this is serious. And then everywhere where fishing occurs, there should be filament disposal boxes, places where people can throw the filament. We don't want to see it dropped in open garbage cans. I mean, that's better than dropping it on the ground. But we also know animals get into garbage cans and they drag stuff out. So these are just a few ideas. And some of the groups that I work with have actually worked with our local Boy Scout groups to build filament boxes and install them in some of the regional parks. So we do have some parks that have them now. And then I'm always open to other ideas. Every single one of these areas, I'm going to just say other ideas because I want people to start thinking about what else could we do to solve this problem? What could we do to reduce conflict with our wild neighbors and to become better neighbors to them?
You know, Michelle, when you see Nestor Gardener programs where they're going into nurseries and giving talks and showing display boards, I thought that'd be a good way to team up with somebody, and get the tag along basically, and maybe have somebody make a board that can show some of these things and help with the education.
Yeah, and that's one reason I'm doing these lifelong learning courses too. I'm doing this course in several locations. And then we do have organizations that do like wildlife and nature fests. And there are several of us that do volunteer, and we run booths on wildlife rescue. And we have a huge picture board already with photos of actual animals in trouble. And then we have like actual stuff we've pulled off of rescue. So you can see, here's a picture of it. Here's the actual lure or the actual pile of bale of or thing of twine, or here's the actual treble hook. So they can actually match them up, which is, the kids actually kind of enjoy doing that. They're like, oh, that's it. And there it is in the picture. So we are doing some of that already, and the more we can do, the better. Definitely.
Great idea to do it in schools, because kids love to teach their parents, oh, Dad, you can't do that.
Yes, yes. And I am trying to figure out how to get into the schools, because that is the perfect location. So that's been on kind of my radar. And I'm working with a group right now. We're thinking of starting up a nonprofit just to do education on wildlife.
You know, the state of California will give grants, and there's nothing better that teachers love than making cartoon books, the coloring books that you can use that to transmit your message in a fun way that kids will take home. Yeah,
that's a great idea. I will bring that up with my group, because like I said, I'm working with a group right now. We're working on potentially becoming a nonprofit focused on wildlife education.
Yeah, forestry department did that with Smokey the Bear.
Yeah. And I've got a friend up in Tahoe that actually has gotten his foot into the door at some of the local schools on bear education.
And we did the big campaign in California for seatbelts, was most successful when we did it through the schools. Yeah, we are, that is on our radar for sure. It's how to get into the schools. So we have other entanglements besides filament. Some of the larger things, and this is something people don't even think about until it happens. Hammocks, sports nets, lighting strings, things that we put in our yards or sometimes even in our schools. And here we have a deer that is tangled up in somebody's hammock. This happens constantly. We get calls, especially in the late fall when the bucks are going through what we call the rut. So they're focused on the females, and part of buck rutting is the bigger your antlers, the more attractive you are to the girls. So the bucks will rake their antlers through bushes and stuff to add decoration, to make their antlers look bigger. Well, they don't really understand that a hammock is really not a safe thing to go raking your antlers through. And so we end up with situations like this. And so we've got, again, a hammock. Here we've got Christmas tree lights. And we even have a buck who somehow managed to get wrapped up in a tarp. And it's all of these are raking their antlers through things, trying to impress the girls. And suddenly it's like, oops, I'm not hung up in a bush. Because, you know, bushes break and they fall off. I'm hung up in something that's not going to fall off. And the big danger we run into with these guys, I mean, here we've got one who can't see where he's going. But the other thing that we run into is, because this stuff doesn't break off like bushes do, they get legs stuck through them and they can break a leg. Or as they're jumping over fences, it will get tangled in the fence and then they get hung up and they end up hanging and breaking a neck. I've had several hammock buck issues just in the last few months, so pretty common, unfortunately.
And Christmas tree lights, every year we get calls for bucks hung up in Christmas tree lights. And here we have, this is a soccer goal. And we have a great horned owl hung up in it. He's actually, his wing and his legs are all threaded through this. And so what probably happened, he probably flew into it from the open side and then attempted to fly through, because they can't really see the strings that well. So he probably attempted to fly back out the other side and ended up tangled up. And again, this is just an unnatural situation for a raptor. And we get calls for owls, hawks. This is fairly common. And sometimes we can go out and untangle them and they're fine. Other times we go out and they've got a broken leg or a broken wing, and it's sometimes a euthanasia. And they get tangled in all kinds of different things. So this is a stadium light. Got a call on this one. Somebody said, we've got a gull. Actually, they said a seagull. There's no such thing as a seagull, but we have all kinds of different gulls that seems to be hung up in this stadium light outside of a business, and nobody knows what to do about it. I actually had to get the fire department to help me get this guy down. He was about 40 feet up in the air. His leg was broken. It was pretty cut up, but we were able to take him in, and he got treatment and was able to be released. But this one was a huge adventure, and it made it onto the news because the fire department showed up. Here we have another buck hung up in a hammock. And this is one that actually Fish and Wildlife came out with me a couple of times to attempt to tranquilize him with a tranq dart gun. But we were in a very urbanized area, and he kept jumping through people's yards, so we couldn't safely get him, unfortunately. The good news, this was a really old hammock, and so unlike the one with the colorful hammock, that hammock was brand new, and so it was still very solid. With this one, it did start breaking. The thread started rotting and breaking off, and so he survived. And ultimately, he's shed one antler. He's got one left. They shed their antlers every year. So if they can survive, ultimately their antlers will be shed and they'll get rid of it. But the fear again is if their leg gets hung up or they get hung up on a fence, then they're probably going to not survive that. So here's a healthy buck. And one reason I'm showing this photo, you can see in one of his antlers, he's got all kinds of plant matter. This is during the rut. So he's trying to attract the girls by raking his antlers through plant matter. And it does make it look bigger, which means the girls think he's very attractive. So how do we fix it? This one is really on us. If you are in an animal pathway, if you know that there are deer or other animals that pass through your area, don't leave entanglements out. If you have a hammock, bring it in at the end of the season. If your kids are playing soccer, that's great, but at least at the end of the season, take the net down, don't leave it out. If possible, take it down every evening. If you have Christmas tree lights on your house or out in trees, don't have them drooping where it's easy for an animal to get tangled in them. Attach them tightly so they're up and flush. Don't use fake spider webs. I see those all the time, and the things you stretch out and attach everywhere. We find dead birds in those all the time. They are just traps for birds. Make sure your decorative lighting is not draped or loose. Take it down if it's not in use. And again, education. Letting people know, letting your neighbors know. If you go through your neighborhood and you see someone has left their hammock out, I mean, this is winter, who's laying out in a hammock right now? Just kind of say, hey, if you thought about maybe putting that up for the year, it'll last longer, it won't rot, and no animal will be at risk of getting tangled up in it if it's put away when you're not using it. And again, other ideas, it's kind of start thinking about what are some things we can do. to help our wild neighbors. And if anyone thinks of anything really interesting, I am happy to take email, phone calls, Facebook messages, because like I said, I work with this all the time. I'm continuously updating my trainings, and I'm working with a group to try to do more training, more education for people.
So anyone, if you do have ideas after you think about this, if you go back onto our website to Michelle's course page, there's a button there where you can reach back out to her through email.
Perfect. Barriers, fencing, mesh, netting, etc. I'm not telling people to take their fences down, but be aware. This was a crazy fence situation. So you're seeing multiple layers of fence, and this is what it looked like to start with. So we had this privacy fencing, then we had some no climb wire. You see that curled back. We had finer chicken wire. We had wood fencing. We had tall T-posts with electric fencing across the top. I mean, this was crazy fencing. And the reason it had been put up like this is the person who had owned this house didn't like deer. So they didn't want deer in their yard. And then they sold the house, and the people that bought it just really weren't aware of it. They kind of looked at it and said, it's really an ugly fence, but it's not our high priority. So no big deal. You got all this fence. You can't see your neighbor. I mean, that's kind of interesting, except one day he left a gate open down at the bottom of the property. And what you were seeing is the fence at the top of the property. This is a few acres. It's a long, thin piece of property. And the only gate to the property is down at the bottom. So that accesses the driveway, the house, and then everything else is fully fenced. And he had left the gate open one day because he had some friends coming, and a mother deer and her baby came through the gate, and that happens. Well, one of the friends drove up. Mama deer ran to the back of the property with baby behind her. Mama deer jumped that fence. Baby couldn't. Baby's now trapped. Mama deer is not going to leave her baby, so she's on the other side of the fence, and they're running back and forth. And there's no way she's going to go down to the bottom of 2 acres and lead him back down. At this point, she's not leaving his side. So they are crying back and forth. They bleat, almost like sheep. And this went on for days. And the baby was at this point totally exhausted, almost ready to keel over. It was emaciated. It was dehydrated. The mother was not much better. And they called into the wildlife rehab group and said, we don't know what to do. Can anybody help with this? And I work the emergency line. And so I got the call and kind of went, well, exactly how did this happen? What? You got deer stuck on both sides of the fence? And I said, you know what? I'll come out and take a look. And so I showed up, looked at the situation, and I said, do you have a gate anywhere up here in the back part of your property? And he said, nope, there's no gate. Looking at this fence, and I said, you basically have 2 solutions. You're either going to have to let the baby die, which that is a solution, or we're going to have to cut your fence. And he said, there's no way I'm letting a baby deer die. I said, okay, are you okay cutting your fence? And he said, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So I went and grabbed my toolbox and did the dissection that you saw here. Took me a couple of hours to get through all the layers. But at that point, we then backed off. Baby was able to get out over the fence and reunite with his mother. And so this one had a happy ending, and the 2 neighbors on both sides of the fence said they kind of kept an eye on them for a while. Both of them did survive. Baby ate quite a bit. And what I had suggested to him is put a small gate in between, because this is going to happen again. You leave your gate open at the bottom, you're in an area with a lot of deer and other wildlife. You're going to trap animals in the yard, have a back way out. And so they put a gate between his fence and the neighbor's fence. And, it was a good way for him to meet his new neighbors, and ultimately they became good friends. So kind of lots of happy endings to this story. Then this was another kind of interesting fencing story. I got a call, and this one actually came through another group that I sometimes work with that's a few counties away. And the call came in that they had an orphaned coyote pup. And I went, oh, okay, I'll go out and get an orphaned coyote pup. I don't mind driving a ways for that. That's kind of a cool rescue. And I show up, and there's this beautiful brand new fence around this pasture. And they lead me over to the coyote den and said, so the coyote pup's not out right now, but we've seen him out yesterday and today, just sitting out here all alone. No mothers has shown up in the last couple of days. So I take my cell phone, turn the camera on, put a protective glove on, pop my phone down into the coyote den, because I was just kind of curious, what am I going to find? Snap a photo, pull it up, and said, okay, it's not an orphan. We have a mother in there. And so I actually then took my real camera and stuck it down and took a better photo. And this is the photo. One of the photos I got. I took several. And they said, that's impossible. We've been watching this pup for a couple of days now. He keeps coming out and crying, and there's no sign of a mother. And I kind of looked around and said, your fence looks brand new. How long has it been here? And he said, we had it installed 2 days ago. And I said, and the pup started coming out crying right after that? And they said, yes. And I said, let's walk the fence line. So we walked the fence line, and it didn't take long to find a newly dug hole under the fence line. They had fenced Mama Coyote out. So she was out foraging when they put the fence up, and they fenced her out from her baby. Took her a couple of days to figure out she could dig under, but she did and reunited. So then the next thing we had to do was kind of, what can we do to encourage Mama Coyote to take her babies and leave? Because we don't want her, they were bringing in goats. We don't want her fenced in. We don't want her digging holes underneath your fence. And so the big things you can do to discourage, especially predators, from hanging around is you can get motion activated lights or something called fox lights, which just flash on randomly. And you can play human sounds. So I said, get a little portable radio, battery run, start just playing anything human sounding, put a couple of fox lights. I actually loaned them some fox lights. And I said, she'll leave. They don't like that kind of stuff. I've cropped this photo so you don't see all of it. This, unfortunately, we get a lot of calls for, especially for deer hung up on wrought iron fences. These are the fences that they have like spear tops, sharp tops. Any kind of sharp top fence, whether it's T-posts, whether it's wrought iron, animals are at risk. And so deer especially jump fences, but so do coyotes. And if they happen to just graze or a leg drops a little bit and they hit it, they're going to get hung up and you're going to end up with something pretty badly injured. So like I said, I get this call multiple times a year. And we end up having to get animal control out to kill the animal. I've got a lot of really gruesome photos of animals hung up in fences, unfortunately. And then this is somebody's roof. This was kind of an interesting story. So she had what she thought were bats coming into her attic. And you can see there's a small hole here in her, and there's a couple of small holes. They actually weren't bats. They were little woodpeckers going in there. There was a whole family of them. And so what she did is had a neighbor go up on a ladder and put up this basically mesh over the holes to keep the bats out. And instead what she did is she trapped these animals in, and when they came out to eat, they were all trapped in the mesh, and every single one of them died. And whether it's bats or birds, I mean, mesh is just, it's going to kill animals. So rather than do something like this, what you want to do is make sure the animals are out and then repair the holes. And putting up things like these wire grids. This little possum actually was walking. Possums love to walk fence lines. They run along fence lines going from one yard to the next. And he actually ended up getting a foot stuck in the wire grid. And so I had to come and remove the grid, get the possum out. He was okay. He was a little cut up, but okay. And then the other picture is another example of some wire mesh. In this case, they were trying to keep owls out, owls and pigeons out. This is a covered horse arena. And instead, they ended up with an owl stuck in the mesh. And the irony of it is it was stuck and alive, so it was flapping, and they couldn't ride in the arena because it was making so much noise. The horses were really terrified. So she called me, and I came and went up and extracted him from the wire mesh. I had to cut the mesh out to get him out. It was all wrapped around his wing, and bring him back down. And another example of wire mesh, this is kind of an interesting one. This is in the third story of an apartment complex, and they had rats that were running along the fire hosing there, and so they put all this mesh up to keep the rats out, but they hadn't sealed it tightly on the edges. And so first of all, rats could still get in. And unfortunately, not only could rats get in, we got this call. This woman was really upset about this. A bird had gotten in, and it basically came in through kind of the little air hole, and then it was trapped there, and it was flying back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it would have died. So she called every rescue organization in the region. I got the call and went out there. And with the help of the maintenance guy who was willing to bring a ladder out, he just was not willing to get up on the ladder. He gave me permission to cut the wire. And what I had him do is stand at one side, because this actually was about a 20-foot long area that they'd covered up. And I had him stand at one side with a pole and basically beating on the wire to chase the bird down to the other side. I'd cut a hole big enough to get my hand in, and I could grab it. And part of what was really interesting is the bird that I grabbed was a meadowlark, which you normally don't see flying up into anything. We're still a little puzzled as to why it was up there, but it could have been any species of bird. I mean, they had not done a good job sealing the wire. And what I told them is, if you're going to keep that wire up to keep rodents out, you need to go around at least once a month and do a check and make sure there's no access points. Because if there's access points, you're going to get birds, and you're going to get the rodents you're trying to keep out. And the really bad thing is they're going to be running around up there. They're potentially going to get trapped there, and they're going to die. And now you're going to have stinky dead things, and people can see them and smell them. So that was just kind of a little education for that apartment complex. And luckily, we were able to rescue the bird. This is another example of fencing. When this went in, this is actually at a city park. And they have beavers. There's a pond behind. You can probably see a little bit of water back here. So there's a family of beavers that lives in the pond. And the beavers were chewing trees, which is what beavers do. So what they did is they put these little fences around the trees. And that's really not the safest thing to do. When I saw these fences go up, my first thought was, oh no, that looks like a disaster waiting to happen. You either want to wrap the tree tightly so nothing can get in that little fence, or you can paint the lower part of the tree with something that will repel beavers. And actually the simplest thing to do is a combination of glue and sand, because the tree can grow through that, but beavers hate sand, so they won't chew on the tree. So I came out one day. This is actually an area where we do a lot of rescues of baby herons. And what you're looking at is a baby black crowned night heron. It had fallen out of its nest and has one wing hooked over the wire. And so it's hanging just above the ground. I extracted the baby. The wing was not broken, took it in for fluids, and ultimately that baby probably survived. But when I came out the following week, there was actually a dead baby hanging in there. So again, it's not a good situation to have this kind of fencing underneath. This is a very active nest site. There's about 100 nests in this area. And then this was a recent call that was really disturbing. The guy called in to our emergency line and he said, I have this little yard outside my office building, and it's full of dead animals. And I went, oh, what do you mean full of dead animals? I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And he said, well, it's really tall fence, and it's, and I looked out this morning, and I don't check it very often, but there's a bunch of animals out there, and I'm pretty sure they're all dead. This was the situation. This was a little courtyard off an office building. You see these in a lot of office buildings. Not only were there dead animals, there's a dead plant. Someone obviously didn't, they put a plant out there at one point to make it look green and they didn't water it. So we have dead plants, dead animals. They come in off the roof, they drop into this courtyard, and they're trapped. Again, anything where animals are going to be trapped, it's a death trap. Then this was an example of an animal that got into landscaping fabric. This is a fox, got this call. This was a pretty extensive rescue. So little fox had bitten onto landscape fabric because there was probably a mouse running across it. And ended up the landscape fabric tore and pierced through its jaw. And the fox takes off, and now it's got landscape fabric pierced through its jaw. And it didn't just take off, it spun. Someone got it on ring camera. It was pretty gruesome. It spun, it fought, and finally this piece of fabric tore off. And so we worked with one of the people in the neighborhood. We brought up a trap, and they would set the trap for 2 hours every night when the fox would commonly come through there with dog food. Then they'd shut the trap down so it wasn't open overnight, because you can end up trapping other animals. And it took 2 weeks, but ultimately we got this fox. And the two of us that had been working with the property owner thought, oh, we'll just come up, one of us will hold the fox, the other will unwrap the landscape fabric, and we'll be able to release it. We get up there, and this is what we found. And I just went, holy cow, I've never seen anything like that before. I mean, it had pierced through the entire lower jaw. So we ended up having to take the fox into a vet, have it anesthetized, have it surgically removed. They were able to give it a long-term painkiller and a long-term antibiotic. And we were able to release the fox the next day. So there was a happy ending to this, but it was over 2 weeks to do this rescue. So here we have a fox being released. Yay, we love healthy animals. Like I said, I'm going to try to have a picture of a healthy animal on every single one of these sections, because it can get pretty gruesome. So how do we fix it? Make sure your fencing is in good repairs. There's no gaps, there's no openings where animals can come in and get trapped. The fact that they can get in doesn't mean they'll always get out, because they don't necessarily find that opening again. So they might get in, and if it's a large area, they end up searching, and it can take a while for them to find an escape route. Spiked tops, T-posts, anything else with a sharp top is dangerous. It's dangerous to wildlife, it's dangerous to your own pets, it's dangerous to human beings. If you have livestock of any kind, horses, goats, donkeys, it's dangerous to them. And those of you who
who have horses probably know that T-posts are something that we just all shudder when we hear about them. You can buy little caps to put on them to make it safer. And that might be another option if you, financially, that's all you can afford to do. Buy the little caps to put on top of the posts. Netting and webbing is often dangerous. So landscape fabric, landscape netting. We get calls all the time to pull small animals out of it. Snakes even get stuck in it. If you're going to do fabric netting, make sure it's well buried so that animals can't get to it. And be aware if you're in an area with high wildlife traffic, including nests. You just need to kind of think about, how could these animals end up getting in trouble? What can I do to make it safer for them? If a gate is left open, like we saw with that deer, make sure that animals aren't accidentally trapped in your yard or your pastures. If they are, you can try chasing them back out, or make sure there's another escape route. And again, other ideas. Think about, what are some other things we can do? We also get a lot of calls for animals stuck in fireplaces, houses, garages, buildings, etc. So what you're seeing here is a fireplace. This call came in through, we actually have an educational nature center that is just a few miles down the road. And someone that lives around the corner from them called and said, I have an owl, a big owl, trapped in my fireplace, and I don't know what to do about it. And so they called me and asked if I could help. And so I called the person. And one of the really crazy things is, not only was there a large owl trapped in the fireplace flue was broken, and it was stuck in a half open position. So there was no way to open or close the flue. So I come out, and first thing I did is play with the flue a little bit. It's like, yeah, you're right, it's broken. Now, we get a lot of calls for small owls trapped in fireplaces. Screech owls, for example. Screech owls are about that big. They're little tiny guys. Everybody thinks they're baby owls, but they're mature owls. This was not a screech owl. This was a great horned owl. I stuck my cell phone up above the broken flue, shot a few photos, pulled it out. You know, you could hear it battering around up there, so it sounded big. I'm like, doesn't sound like a screech owl. Pulled it out, looked at it, went, oh my God, you have a great horned owl in your fireplace. I don't even know how that happened. So I was able to, because it was trapped in kind of this fairly small area, about the only thing I could do was get in there, grab it, and then slowly work it out in the space I had. The flue opened part way, and so I could only get one hand in. I was able to get a hand in. Great horned owls are very aggressive, and it started grabbing at my hand. And I had a protective glove on, obviously, otherwise I probably would have lost a few fingers. And so once it started grabbing my hand, I was able to get hold of a talon. Then I could get another hand up behind it and kind of push its wings down so I wasn't going to injure the wings, and slowly maneuver it through that crack and out. And so here you've got a picture of me, and I literally was in their fireplace. So I am a little bit dirty in this picture. I have some soot all over my face, but I was able to get her out. And she was uninjured. I took her up to our rehab facility. They checked her out. They did a full health check. And the next day I was able to take her back and release her. And meanwhile, the people that owned the house had a chimney repair person come out and repair the spark arrestor. So apparently the spark arrestor, which is around the chimney to keep sparks from going out and animals from coming in, had apparently peeled off. So they got that repaired, so she was not going to be getting back down the chimney. And we were able to release her, which is a good thing because it was a mature female. They tend to mate for life. Pretty sure she probably had a nest and a
mate already there. And then here's a screech owl. So just to kind of give you an idea of a different species. This was another one I pulled out of a fireplace, much smaller, much less dangerous to handle, much easier to pull out of a fireplace. We get calls for screech owls pretty regularly in fireplaces, stuck in houses, stuck in buildings. My neighbor called me not that long ago. One got into a garage and then up into the attic above the garage. So I went up in her attic and got him out. So here I am going after, here it's a screech owl. Here it's actually a dove who came through a spark arrestor and then got stuck in a fireplace. So the little nets, we actually get these at the dollar store. They're butterfly nets and they're perfect because you can bend them and they cost you $1.25. So who cares if you destroy it, but you can get it in, sometimes grab animals with it. Like I said, we get a lot of screech owl calls. So these are all different screech owls I've pulled out of fireplaces, chimneys, people's houses. They're really cute little owls. I love rescuing screech owls because I'm not in any risk of getting hurt. They're pretty small and they're very cute. We also get a lot of calls for raptors that have ended up in warehouses. And things like Home Depot, Lowe's, the big chain warehouses, they often have man doors that people walk through that come off their gardening centers. And they get all kinds of pigeons and doves and stuff that will move into the gardening center. And sometimes those birds will fly into the warehouse through the man doors. Not only do they fly through, but hunters chase them through. And so this is a Cooper's hawk. And Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks are both very similar looking. Both hunt birds. And so they will chase after these other birds into the warehouse store. And then their natural instinct, once they catch the bird and eat it, which they usually do, is they look for light, because that's their escape route. And light in most warehouses is up at the top. They all have skylights or high dormer windows. And so that's where the hawks fly. That's their instinct, is to go for the light and as high as possible because that's where it's safe. They can't get out. These windows don't open. The skylights don't open. And they end up trapped here. And they will often starve to death. Or I actually had one at a grocery store the other day. And by the time I got out there, it had battered itself to death on the window. It dropped dead in the middle of the store. So we will go in and we'll borrow the big ladders. And sometimes it takes 2 people. We'll attempt to trap them up against the skylights or the dormer windows. And if we can trap them, we'll bring them out and release them. So this is in, I don't remember if it's a Home Depot or a Lowe's. I spend a lot of time in both of them. I mean, it's a Cooper's hawk. It's another one of these. And here's another Cooper's hawk. And this one actually came through, this is in an Airbnb. He crashed through a window chasing a pigeon, ate the pigeon, and then went to the highest light source, which was upstairs, where he was trapped. And it's not just hawks. This is a barn owl that got trapped in a warehouse. And the same thing. So a lot of warehouses, they either have the man doors or they have the roll-up doors that are open while they're in business, and they don't roll all the way to the top. And then you've got this situation, you can see it. This is the warehouse that the owl's trapped in. The windows are up high. And so that's the escape route. And so he's perched up in the corner between these windows. And this is the same warehouse. They had dead birds everywhere. So they have all these shelves. They're shelving through the entire warehouse. And this is a huge warehouse. As I climbed up onto the top of the ladder and looked across the shelving, there were little bodies all over the place. So a lot of birds had died. And one of the warehouse supervisors said he collected hummingbirds. So anytime he'd find a dead hummingbird, he'd put it in this display case. And he said, I'm doing this to show people how many of these birds are dying in our warehouse. And it's just like, well, that's pretty horrifying, but it's also kind of fascinating. So one of the things I recommended they do for the hummingbirds is just hang a few hummingbird feeders up. So at least they have a chance to survive. And then this is called a bolshatri trap, sometimes called BC trap. This is one of the things we do to attempt to trap raptors. And so what you're seeing here, this is a mouse, and there's another mouse inside. They're dead mice, so they're not alive. And we'll put that in as bait. And if the bird comes down to attack the mouse, you see all these little filaments? They get stuck in the filament. And so there's also, you can't see it, but I have a net right behind it. And so I tell the people, if you see a bird land on this, it's going to be trapped. You put the net over it and you call me, and then I'll come out and get the bird. So this is one of the things we use to attempt to catch and remove the raptors. The other thing we use is hand nets with extension handles. So here's some happy owls out where they should be. This is a pair that lives about 2 miles from me. So how do we fix it? Ensure your screens are in good repair. Don't leave doors and windows open. So it's okay to leave them open if you have a good screen over them, but not open to the outdoors, because animals will come in. And not just birds. I actually got a call at one point. Someone had left their door open and a raccoon came in. You don't want a raccoon in your house. They are vicious. And he ended up shredding one of the occupants' arms. I mean, she had to go to the hospital. So keep your windows and doors closed, or if you've got screens on them, make sure they're in good repair so animals don't get in. Make sure your spark arresters at the top of your chimney are in good repair and are installed. In older houses, sometimes they didn't have them. This is an area that costs money, but warehouses, their dormer windows should be openable. Warehouse stores start requesting that they have windows that can be opened, so when birds get in, they can open the windows so that they can escape. And again, other ideas, things I'm always open to, other thoughts in this area.
You know, the other thing that can come in if you leave your door open are snakes.
Yes, and skunks. And I'm personally, the skunk would freak me out more than the snake, but both of them, snakes. I got a call, someone ended up with skinks, lizards, 2 of them in her house, and she was terrified. I mean, anything can walk or slither into your house. Falling in, storm drains, pools, wells, etc. And here I have a picture of a storm drain. This is your typical storm drain. It's got a little open area here. And baby animals fall into these, as do not just baby wild animals. I have some friends who do feral cat rescue, and they pull cats out of storm drains as well, kittens. Pools are notorious places for animals to fall in, especially young animals. And these 2 photos, one of them is the situation you can, if you look very carefully in this pool, there's this little alcove. This young hawk fell in the pool, managed to swim over to this edge, and is sitting on the rock underneath the ledge. So it didn't drown, but there's no easy access without swimming. And the homeowners didn't want to attempt to handle it because it was a pretty good sized hawk. So I was able to go in with an extension handle. I actually thought about just swimming in and just went, it's going to be too hard to try to get out carrying a hawk around. But I was able to get an extension, a pole taped to one of my extension handle nets, and I was able to scoop it out. And this was the little guy that I got out of there. Pools are, unfortunately, death traps for baby animals. So this little lip on the pool is enough to drown a lot of different animals, because It's not like a natural river or stream where they can actually crawl out. And ducklings, everybody says, oh, ducks and geese, they can swim, they'll be fine. But baby ducklings, for about their first 3 to 5 days of life, are not strong enough to jump out of a pool. And they can only swim for a little while before they drown. So we'll get calls for baby ducklings stuck in pools that are too small to get out. And that's one of those calls when we get them. You go as fast as you can, because it's like, I could get there and they could all be dead. And so we rush out, we scoop them out, and then the fun thing is now we have to catch their mother. Because you can't just release them, they'll go back in the pool. So what you need to do is move them out of that yard, someplace safe. So in this case, you see the bushes behind the net. There's probably a nest in there. What I tell people is, if you see ducks hanging around, don't encourage it. They're going to nest there. So we go and we scoop them out, we put them in a crate, and then we attempt to capture the mothers so we can keep them together. So the last thing I want to do is create a bunch of orphaned baby ducks. And so pools, storm drains, got some animals, some baby animals that fell down the storm drain. Every year we get calls for especially ducklings and goslings stuck in storm drains. And I'm the smallest person in the group, so I'm the one they throw down into the drain. This is it's actually an old well that wasn't finished. So someone started to dig a well, realized that there was a better water source somewhere else, and they just left this hole. So you see this hair sticking out? It's a skunk. It's a baby skunk that fell in, and it was there for a couple of days. And normally I don't like to rescue skunks because they're thankless little creatures. It's guaranteed they're going to spray you. So I called a friend of mine who does skunk rehab. She does not do field rescue, but she doesn't care if she gets sprayed. She works with skunks every day. I said, okay, we're going to go out and do this together. I'm going to stand a safe distance away and I'm going to tell you what to do. And she said, really? She's super excited. I took her out there. She rescued the skunk. She got sprayed. She didn't care. The skunk was fine. She took him home, and a few weeks later, he was old enough to be released. Meanwhile, I stood far enough back that I could tell her what to do. Good job, yay! And I didn't have to smell bad. So, team effort, we saved the skunk. And here's some healthy babies. So baby ducklings out at the river, they're actually sitting on a turtle. This actually happens quite often out there. We have a lot of these turtles. These are actually an invasive species out here, but they're all over the place. They're red-eared sliders. For some reason, they're pretty patient about having ducks sit on them, and the ducklings love to sit on them. So thought it was kind of a cute picture of healthy baby ducks. How do we fix this? One of the things that I like to point out to people is you can actually buy something called a frog log, or you can even build your own. Go on Amazon, look up frog log. It's pretty simple. It has a little floating platform and then a little ramp and a weight at the top. So the weight sits at the top of your pool. It's got the ramp and the platform that floats in the pool. And that way, anything that ends up falling in your pool has an escape route. And they call them frog logs because frogs do actually drown in swimming pools. So they were originally created for frogs, but they'll work for lizards, snakes, baby ducks, all kinds of different animals. And you don't have to purchase them. You can create your own. I've seen people do it with like foam floating mats, where they just put a couple of rocks on one side and slant it down into the pool, so they've got a little ramp coming out of the pool. Drain your unused water sources, and there's a lot of reasons to do that. Safety of our animals, and mosquitoes breed in water, so there's a lot of reasons that we want to keep them drained. Ask your city or county if they're willing to install safety covers over the storm drains during baby season, so during later spring, when we have more baby animals that start falling down into the storm drains, and we have less rain and leaves coming into the storm drains. So it is a time when it's a little bit more reasonable to kind of cover them up. Keep manholes, wells, and other holes covered so we don't end up with animals falling down them. We've even seen baby deer fall into old wells. So it's safer to keep things covered. And then again, think about what other ideas do we have? Traffic is unfortunately a huge cause of animal injury. Here's the little geese that I showed early on, little family of geese that we ended up having to herd across the street down until we could find a man gate, and we were able to reach over the man gate with a little latch, pull it open, and give the geese a safe place to take their family. And here's one of the geese, one of the babies. So when we opened that gate, most of the babies followed the parents in, but we had a couple that ran off into the bushes. And so I had to go bush diving and catch a couple of baby geese. So they're cute little guys. There's actually a golf course over on the other side of this fence. So they're living on the golf course now. It's a great place for geese. This was a really sad story. So this is a bear cub. There's actually 3 bear cubs. Their mother was hit by a car in a fairly urban area, suburban. So not in the city, but up in the foothills. Mama was hit by a car. She holed up for several months. She actually lived, but she had a pretty badly broken leg. And so her babies were on their own. And they just ended up running around through the neighborhood, through several apartment complexes, dumpster diving. People were hand feeding them. I mean, it was a bad situation. I shot this photo in somebody's backyard. I came back there. They had messaged and said, hey, there's bear cubs here right now. So I went running over there because I've been trying to track these babies down and had put the word out to the entire neighborhood. I show up and they are hand feeding them, which is about the worst thing you can do. You do not want wild animals habituated to people, and especially something like a bear. I mean, they're super cute here and they're small. They're probably 15 pounds. But next year, they're going to be 100 pounds. In 3 years, they're going to be 300 or 400 pounds. And if you hand feed them now, they're going to keep expecting people to hand feed them, and they're going to get pretty aggressive about it. So I showed up and promptly chased them up the tree, because that's the instinct they need. When people show up, they need to run. That's what I want bears to think. People are bad. And then I shot this photo. I was in communication with Fish and Wildlife through the whole process because we have special rules with certain animals, and bears are one of them. We can't just rescue bears. We have to have Fish and Wildlife involved. And so we ended up monitoring these guys for several months, and the mother, they got a tracker out who found the mother. So we knew we were going to be able to have these babies reunited. It was just a matter of now educating the entire neighborhood. And I worked with Fish and Wildlife, and we got all kinds of brochures distributed all throughout the neighborhood on not feeding wildlife and what to do with bears. And ultimately, it was a happy ending, but it was a pretty stressful few months. This was another hit by a car deer. This was an interesting one. I got called in on it because someone thought it had been a recent injury. And once I got some good photos and video, I realized this guy had been hit some time ago and had learned to survive basically as a 3-legged deer. I mean, he ran up and down hills, was perfectly functional, but it's an example of what happens. He's near that Hazel Avenue area. It's what happens when wildlife and cars interact. This was a recent situation where someone hit a deer. It was badly injured. Ended up in a suburban neighborhood on somebody's lawn, was dragging itself around. I ended up working. It took me a while to get someone out to euthanize it. This deer was badly injured. He had a broken jaw, a couple of broken legs. And Fish and Wildlife actually agreed to come out, but it actually took me 7 hours to get someone to come out and deal with it.
This great egret was hit by a car, so you can see his wing is hanging. He's got a broken wing. And he'd been running around through, this is actually a grape vineyard. So he'd been running through the vineyards attempting to survive. And the owner of the vineyard called and said, he's going to starve to death or he's going to get run over by one of the tractors out here. So we came and captured him and took him in. I get a lot of calls for, especially for barn owls hit by cars. They tend to fly low at dusk, hunting, looking over the fields. And we have a lot of farm fields in the Sacramento area, and there's roads going through them. There's even freeways running through some of the farm fields. And so as they fly low field to field, they go through a traffic area and they get hit. Super common injury. So I pulled this one off a median divide out on one of the highways. So here's a healthy bear. He's actually out hunting fish. These are little salmon. So this is what we want to see. Wild animals in the wild, healthy and happy. How do we fix it? Drive carefully, especially when you're in a wildlife area, especially certain times of the year. The time changes. Daylight savings time tends to be at some very busy times of the year for wildlife. Spring is mating season, fall is deer rutting season. And so the change in time seems to coordinate with dangerous times on the road. So just be aware, especially if you're in an area where there is wildlife, that there is wildlife. You want to be careful. You don't want to hit one of these animals. Some of these animals could destroy your car. Installation of bridges and tunnels, it's very expensive, but we're seeing it happen in some communities. Southern California just installed an overpass that made it on the news, that right before a mountain lion, right after a mountain lion had been hit on the freeway, they finished the tunnel. And it was kind of like, yeah, if you'd finished it a little earlier, maybe the mountain lion would have survived. But it was kind of good timing because it was like, this is why we're doing it. And I know when I visited Europe, they have a lot of places where they've done bridges and tunnels to protect animals. So we're a little behind in that area. Warning signs. This past year, it's the first time I've seen this happen. On some of our freeways that go up to the foothills, they started putting up warning signs saying, watch for deer. This is busy deer season. And I thought, oh, that's a really great idea. And of course, education and other ideas. Target practice, I'm very sad to say, we get a lot of calls like this. People buy their kids dart guns or bow and arrow sets, and the kids shoot them in the backyard, and they have a good time with them, and then after a while, they get bored. And they go, and they take it out to a park or something, and they're playing with their friends, and a turkey or a goose walks by, and they go, huh, I wonder if I could hit that. I probably can't, but let's give it a try. Uh-oh, I hit it. And they usually run away at that point. And then later on, somebody will call and say, we've got a turkey or a goose or a deer that has a dart, an arrow, a blowgun pistol dart, something going through it. We probably get almost as many calls for this as we do for the fishing line. Believe it or not, this is an area where there's just a lot of poaching. This is a blow dart, a pistol gun dart, and this is a serious dart. This one is meant to kill. This is not like, this is just a practice arrow. This is something where someone was seriously out to hurt whatever they were shooting. And we actually had a whole series of geese and ducks being shot at a local park. We ended up catching about 6 of them. Most of them died from the damage. This is, again, not a serious dart. This is just a practice dart, but you can see it went through this duck. And I got a call, a friend of mine actually saw this duck out on the river and called me. And I went out and caught it.
and called Fish and Wildlife and said, I think there's some poaching going on at the river. And I called park rangers and Fish and Wildlife. And I was told, we've been trying to catch that duck for a week. Please don't chase it. And I said, I actually have it in my hands. I netted it. It wasn't that hard to catch. And within an hour, I had a Fish and Wildlife warden and a park ranger out. First of all, they didn't believe I'd actually caught it. And then they wanted it for evidence. So I don't know if they ever actually caught the poacher, but the duck actually was fine. It had, the hole was just basically through the skin right above its back. So there was no bite, no organ damage, luckily. So she lived. And this is a deer. So people are practicing on just about anything they can find. And this little guy ended up being fine. It didn't go that deep because, again, it's just a target dart, so it doesn't have a sharp head. But he ended up with a pretty good hole above his leg. And this is the dart. This is the dart that we got out of the deer. So again, some healthy, happy ducks. Nice to see something that doesn't have a dart or an arrow through it. And here, education. Report suspicious activities. I'm in California, so Fish and Wildlife has something called CalTip. A lot of state fish and wildlife groups have these kind of hotlines where you can call in suspected illegal activity, poaching activity, or anything that can be hurting wild animals. And then if you've got kids, grandkids, is it really appropriate to give them bows, arrows, dart guns? Is that something we want to give young children? And if we do, we need to make sure they are educated and supervised. And then other ideas. Again, think about what are some things we can do to help our wild neighbors. Rodenticide and other poisoning. Here we see a hawk down and out. Hawks and owls are probably the #1 victims of rodent poisoning because they eat the poisoned rodents. But we also see mammals. So a coyote. I've got some really sad photos of foxes that have died of rodent poisoning, but they're too grim to put up. They're dying or they're dead. This is a red-tailed hawk that ate a poisoned rodent. Raccoon who actually got into a box of rodenticide. I mean, the stuff is sweet. Apparently it tastes quite good. And so it was sick and we went out, and this one we actually were able to save. A lot of animals end up dying. And so here he is being released a little while later. So happy, healthy raccoon in the wild where he belongs. And how do we fix this problem? We encourage natural predators, foxes, coyotes, bats, owls, hawks. So you don't need to use poisoning. Check your house to make sure it's in good repair so animals can't get in. Caulk or steel wool the small openings so you don't get animals breaking into the house. Essential oils like peppermint and lavender can be, a lot of mice and rats don't like that odor. Ammonia smells like predator urine, so it sometimes will scare off mice and rats. Cats and dogs, make sure they're kept in your home or yard so that they're not out chasing down other wildlife. Catch and release traps, motion activated lights, motion activated sprinklers, fox lights, those are the lights that just randomly come on. Education, so people understand how dangerous poison is. And then of course, think about other ideas. And then garbage. So we've got a face mask and a fishing lure on this poor goose. Garbage in this pond. So we have baby black-crowned night herons sitting on a thrown away shopping cart. Jars and canisters and anything with openings in it. This little guy actually ran around for about a week like this. So here we have some healthy coyotes, not in garbage. How do we fix it? Community cleanups. Every community has some kind of organizations that do cleanup. Creek Weeks. In Sacramento, we have a group called Sacramento Picks It Up. We have American River Parkway Foundation that does cleanup weeks, Adopt a Creek, Earth Day. There's all kinds of different groups that organize cleanups. Support them. Go out and help. Have legislation to reduce waste. I've gone into some countries where they don't even allow plastic bags anymore. Ban dangerous garbage. Mylar balloons is one example of really dangerous garbage. In California, you can't, we have no more pop tops anymore because animals were getting hurt. You can see you've got this wood duck who's got a pop lid stuck around his bill. And again, other ideas. Think about things we can do. And then just kind of an assortment of other things to be aware of. Lead poisoning. Some people have old ammo from the days when you could have lead in your ammo. Don't use it. Throw it away. Dogs and cats and children that are running loose. I am shocked at, I go out to the river and I see kids throwing rocks at animals. I've seen kids throw rocks and kill ducks several times, break their necks. I was just out at the river a couple of weeks ago walking with a friend, and there were kids throwing rocks at a crawdad. I went and yelled at them. The parents yelled at me. I pointed out that this was a living creature and their kids were killing it. So supervise and educate your children so that they love animals instead of want to hurt them. Fires, this is California. We have a lot of problems with fire, and it forces animals down into urban areas. Humans feeding animals, taming animals, kidnapping baby animals. We get a lot of calls where someone has attempted to raise a baby animal and then it becomes an adult. You can't turn it loose at that point because it's too habituated to people, but it's become dangerous. It's now an adult, it's got hormones, it flies, it bites, it wants to breed. So make sure people understand wild animals need to stay wild. Electrical and utility lines, this picture over here, this great blue heron actually hit a utility line and broke its wing. So we're out there at night trying to see if we can save it. Jars, cans, anything with holes or openings. And we saw the coyote with its head stuck in the jar. We've got a deer here whose head stuck in a chicken feeder. Sticky traps, snap traps. Most traps are dangerous to animals. Tree trimming during nesting season, and then overall loss of habitat. That's one of the biggest issues we deal with. So this is an albino rattlesnake, so very rare. You can see it's got some injuries on it. Cat caught it. It ended up dying of its injuries. I had a whole nest full of baby screech owls come down in somebody's yard. By the time I got there, their dog had killed all but one. This is the only one that survived. This otter was attacked by a dog, and it ended up dying of its injuries. It's pretty beat up. This is an example of humans feeding animals. This turkey. This is probably the heaviest animal I ever caught. It's turkey. It's over 20 pounds. I got the call because it couldn't fly. So people in the neighborhood were afraid it had broken a wing and it couldn't fly. So turkeys need to be able to get up at night for safety. Otherwise an animal will kill them. It could no longer roost. I took it in. We weighed it. It was over 20 pounds. And we're trying to figure out, we couldn't find anything wrong with it other than it was obese. Problem was it was so fat it couldn't fly anymore. So it ended up in turkey fat farm for a few months, losing weight. Tree trimming. This is actually me up here. We have a screech owl nesting in this tree. So they'd started trimming it. And luckily, the guy trimming it saw something move. And so he called us and said, I'm not sure, but I think I have a nest. And so I came out and we were able to verify what was going on there, which was, yes, we have a nest. So they held off on cutting this part of the tree where the crevice is until the babies had fledged. This is the great horned, or the great blue heron that ended up breaking its wing on an electrical wire.
Examples of snap traps. I actually had a baby turkey who broke its leg here. Sticky trap, they're horrible. Here we've got a bat on a sticky trap. We've gotten calls with snakes, lizards, bats, birds. Sticky traps are deadly to a lot of different animals. And then people kidnapping wild baby animals. These were both two different situations. A wood duck that someone had raised, and then once she got old enough, she started flying, so she would escape out into the neighborhoods. She couldn't survive on her own, but she really didn't want to survive with humans anymore. And then someone had actually adopted a baby barn owl, and then as it got older, it started getting a little aggressive, so now it was like, what do we do with this barn owl? So both of these animals ended up in education situations. They're education animals now because they can't be released. Loss of habitat. We've got a tiny little burrowing owl. These are in California. These are a species of concern because they're not yet endangered, but they're heading that direction. I found it in this parking lot. Underneath, there's some, you can't really see where the chairs are, but they're over kind of on this side of the parking area. They create a little sitting area, and this poor little burrowing owl had probably at one point had a burrow out here. And then education. Education is really key here, and I've got a lot of photos here. This is a friend of mine doing education with a education animal, what we call an ambassador animal. So it's a wild animal that can't be released due to its injury or because it was human habituated. This is me at one of the booths that I run, and this is part of the booth. This is another friend who does wildlife education just on mountain lions, living with mountain lions. Here I am doing an education program for a live group. So education is key. I'd like to get into the schools, but right now I haven't found that option, but I have found some other areas where groups of us can go out and educate. So sorry, we ran a little bit over, but thank you so much for attending. You can follow me on Facebook. It's Michele Dodge. My picture is me holding, I think it's an owl. You don't have to friend me. You can just, if you're just curious about either the wildlife photography or usually at the end of the week, usually on Sundays, I do a little update on what I rescued for the year. I don't have any privacy settings other than my friend list is private. So easy to follow or easy to check in once in a while and see what's going on. Thank you again. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Your photographs are always a key element. And I see someone here saying, thank you so much. Your Facebook page is amazing. Your work is amazing. I would completely agree with that. And I love following on Facebook too, because they get all kinds of interesting stories and great pictures.
Thank you so much.
It's very inspiring.
And I should ask, does anyone have any questions from Michele?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
I have one. I don't know if you've heard about that Flacco, the Eurasian owl that's in New York City. He escaped the zoo.
Yes.
And now he's in Central Park, and they've been trying to trap him, and they failed.
Yes, and they've kind of decided they're going to just let him be wild.
Yeah, and they're afraid that it's going to eat the get rat poisons or something because there's so many rats, and he's eating all the rats in Central Park.
Yes, I would be worried about rodenticide, and I'm also always worried about a non-native species because there's probably other owls there and he may start killing them off. So that's a concern as well. Unfortunately, he's healthy and fully flighted, so it's going to be hard to catch him, but maybe they could put out like that bull tree trap. They might want to put a few of those out, but they could. The problem with those is you do have to monitor them. You have to sit and watch because if something gets trapped in it, it can get hurt if it's just left there.
I'm surprised they haven't asked you.
Yeah, New York would be a long drive.
That's true.
Michele, you remember the up in Pasadena, all the people would release their parrots after they got.
Yes, and we have that in San Francisco too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we always run into those little stories. I mean, the red sliders that you saw, the turtles with the red, that started with people just, they get them as pets and they get too big and they'd release them, and they're all over the waterways now. And we have a native species of turtle, western pond turtles. They're highly endangered now because the red sliders have taken over the territory.
Huh. Now you see Elaine here because she's showing her video now. Elaine has been instrumental in passing a ordinance, I guess, or a law here in Talbot County. Starting 1st April, the stores no longer can use plastic bags.
Well, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Lynn, for that plug, or whatever you want to call it. I love this class, Michelle, because the plastic bag ordinance passed here. We're really proud of it in Easton, because we're right here with all the waterways that feed into the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah.
And these plastic bags, not to mention all the other kinds of plastic, but the plastic bags, fly into the trees and fly and go into the bay, go into all the rivers that go into the bay. And there's so much wildlife involved in getting it involved with the plastic pollution.
Yeah, yeah.
So this was like a step in the right direction, I guess.
It is, absolutely. Plastic bags are horrible. I mean, animals ingest them and they die.
So I'm trying to convince Michelle to come out here for a visit and take grass out here. I'm trying to decide what would be the best time for her for wildlife, especially for the birds.
Especially for the osprey.
Yeah, they're out there right now, aren't they?
Yep. They come back here in March.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, from South America.
Yeah.
We've also had eagles here dying from lead poisoning.
Ooh.
And so when you brought up the predator birds, what do you call them again? Eating
Raptors, yeah.
the raptors, eating the mice that may have eaten something or been poisoned, and it's always a big mystery here, because there'll be it's a terrible mystery to everybody just what killed these eagles.
Yeah, we test when we bring in an eagle, especially. One of the first things we do is test for lead poisoning.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we do find it.
Well, especially
and lead ammo has been outlawed in California for quite a while, but people still have stored. They still have it, and they keep using it.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's outlawed here in Maryland too, but for the same thing, the same issue. It's there. Sometimes you can't even, someone is picking stuff up in the morning before they go out, and they don't even notice that they picked up a box full of stuff. And you'll see it out in the field where maybe a deer died and nobody, the hunters didn't know that where it fell, and you'll see the carrion eating on it, and that's it. That's how it happens.
Yep.
It happens. But even here in neighborhoods where people you get rats in their attic, and they throw those
blue blocks. Yeah.
Those are made to be tasty to them, but they basically are made with coumadin, which will go to kill them eventually. And so then if they happen to get out of the house before they die, then that's when the foxes and the hawks, we have Cooper's hawks that keep an eye on our backyard, and they puts them at risk. So.
Yeah. And rodenticide's actually a huge issue.
One of my favorite animals that I feel so sorry for, always ending up on the roads dead, are the poor little possums.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And it just seems like hardly a week or two goes by without seeing a dead one, just trying to cross the road.
They're slow moving.
Yes.
They don't stand a chance. And actually, what I tell people is during spring, you see one and it's freshly killed. If it's safe, you can pull over and check to see if it's a female. Check in its pouch. There could be live babies in there.
Wow.
And if you have a rehab group in your area, they can raise those babies.
Good.
We get box turtles around here, and it's pretty cool because people will see a box turtle and they'll stop their car, and everybody else stopping behind them while they carefully pull that turtle over to the side to be safe. Same with
Yeah. I mean, I love when I see stories like that where people are helping animals.
Same with Canada geese. We get a lot of them raising their young in our ponds, and so anytime there's development, there have to be their ponds that are put in as part of, because they're so low with the waterways, and it's required by ordinance. And you'll see, so as a result, you'll see a lot of the geese landing here and sometimes raising their young, and they invariably try and cross the road, and then all the cars stop and patiently. That's a
Yeah,
small.
we have a lot of people that will stop. We have a lot of wild turkeys out here.
Mhm.
And then, especially along the American River Parkway. And most people will stop, but every once in a while, I have actually seen people purposefully run them over. It's like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Oh my God.
Oh,
Kids misbehave by killing animals.
Yeah.
But the thought of what kind of child is that going to be when they grow up?
Yes. I mean, I've seen 2 instances now where kids have thrown rocks and badly hurt a goose and a duck.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the crawdad out at the river, I was just like, seriously, guys, that's a living animal.
mm,
Yeah.
that's sad.
Yeah. Well, we might be running out of our Zoom time here pretty soon, so we should probably,
Okay.
Michelle. But thank you again for doing this. It's just
Oh,
love.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.